Hi.
Hello. Hi, Susan.
Okay. Well, this is Elliot Greenwald. I'm the president of the District 16 Democratic Club, and I'd like to welcome everybody to what has become an annual, and the past 2 years, a virtual annual
Trying to get into the shot here.
legislative update from our, very wonderful legislative delegation. And so, anyway, I will introduce our delegation shortly. Before I do that, there are, and I'm not sure if they're in the room yet, but we have several current and former elected officials who I'd like to recognize. Karen Brito, former delegate and also former chair of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. Bill Frick, former delegate from District 16. Jeffrey Slavin, mayor of Somerset. Evan Glass, member of the Montgomery Montgomery County Council. And there are also candidates for public office who are here or will be here shortly. Thomas DeGenoia, candidate for Montgomery County State's Attorney. Aruna Miller, candidate for Lieutenant Governor, and Marilyn Pierre, candidate for Circuit Court Judge. We also have several current and former Democratic Party leaders. Shruti Bhatnagar from District 18, Joseph Gebhardt from District 16, Susie Kaplan from District 39, Andrew Sondry, MCDCC member at large, and Susan Turnbull, who's a former chair of the Maryland Democratic Party and was also at one point a candidate for lieutenant governor. We also have here attending Joan Kleinman on behalf of Senator Van Hollen. And so I'd like to recognize all those people. I also want to recognize the board of the District 16 Democratic Club. We have Jean Granoff, who's also our treasurer and membership chair, Judy Hallett, Harant Jamjoshin, Lena Jamjoshin, Michelle Henderson, and Samir Paul. And Samir is very kindly helping me out with moderating this event tonight by culling the questions and feeding them to me. So when we get to the Q&A, Samir is going to be working in the background. Samir was actually a former candidate for delegate from District 16. And we also have Scott Goldberg, who is a member at large of the MCDCC and a candidate for county council at large. And so I think that includes the introductions until we get to our headliners for this evening. But I did want to check. I saw that Jean Granoff was attending. And Jean, did you have any announcements to make?
Well, now you should be able to hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The only announcement I have is one that I make all the time, which is make sure your email is up to date and send it to me so I could put it on our email list, because it's our primary, just about our only means of communication. And we want to make sure you get announcements for District 16 events such as this one. And probably we'll be having more this year because it's an election year.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jean. And now we'll move on. I'm going to do very brief introductions of our four speakers for this evening. We have Senator Susan Lee, and Senator Lee has been Majority Whip of the Senate since 2019. Prior to that, she was Deputy Majority Whip. She's a member of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology, the Executive Nominations Committee, the Legislative and Legislative Policy Committee. She's also Vice Chair of the Montgomery County delegation. Now, Delegate Ariana Kelly, unfortunately, is stuck on an airplane due to all the air traffic delays these days. And so hopefully she will be able to join us a little bit later in the evening. But I will do the introductions for Delegate Kelly at the moment, at this moment. She's been a member of the House of Delegates since 2011. She's Deputy Majority Whip, a member of the Health and Government Operations Committee, and the Joint Committee on Federal Relations, and the Joint Committee on Children, Youth, and Families. We have Delegate Mark Corman, who's been a member of the House of Delegates since 2015. He's a member of the Appropriations Committee, the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight, and the Legislative Policy Committee, and the Spending Affordability Committee. And Delegate Sarah Love, our newest delegate, has been a member of the House of Delegates since 2019. She is a member of the Environment and Transportation Committee, and is a member of the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee and the Chesapeake Bay Commission. And of course, I didn't go over all the assignments that each of our members of the delegation have to keep the introductions brief, but certainly if any of you want to supplement what I've had to say, of course, feel free. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Senator Lee to give a brief overview of what she expects to happen in the Senate. And so please go ahead, Senator Lee.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elliot. Also, Michael and Samir and your fabulous District 16 team and everyone who's participating in today's, I guess, District 16 Town Hall, for inviting me and my District 16 team colleagues, Delegate Ariana Kelly, who hopefully will be here on there later, and Delegate Mark Corman and Delegate Sarah Love to speak about our upcoming 2022 session. I have to say, I'm very proud to be able to serve with such an outstanding team. They've all distinguished themselves in the House of Delegates, Ariana being the leader in healthcare, especially during this pandemic and issues impacting women, medical leave, reproductive rights. And of course, Mark, who is the chair of our House Montgomery County delegation, and his very high expertise on issues dealing with the budget and transportation. And of course, Sarah, our newest member, on issues dealing with things like the environment, civil rights, and privacy rights. So she's been outstanding in every single way. And I just want to give a shout out to my wonderful colleague, Ariana Kelly. She just got married in Hawaii to Stephen Taylor, and I wish to extend my heartfelt congratulations to them. She got on an airplane to come all the way back here, but got stuck in LA. But I understand she's on her way back, and hopefully we'll hear from her, particularly on healthcare issues. So anyway, congratulations, Ariana and Stephen. As you know, I'm the Senate Majority Whip and a member of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. And a lot of my bills, of course, because of that committee, deal with criminal and social justice issues, fighting domestic violence, human trafficking, things like pay inequity, cyber attacks, and identity theft. But I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the honor and privilege of allowing me to serve you and represent you in the Maryland State Senate. It's been a wonderful, wonderful ride, and I hope to do even more in the upcoming session. But during the 2021 session, we had to work under some of the most challenging circumstances and take major precautions to avoid being affected or infecting others, including shortening our floor time, which sometimes is a good thing too, cuts down on debate, online hearings, but most particularly, we miss having our advocates being able to be actually on the premises, which in that case made a big difference in getting our bills passed. But despite these challenges, we were still able to have a very productive session. And I know Mark and Sarah will tell you about what happened on the House side. One good thing is we passed a package of police reform bills to increase public safety and public trust, transparency and accountability, and address hundreds of years of systemic injustices and inequalities. In December, we also had a special session to pass congressional redistricting and also to override a number of Governor Hogan's vetoes of bills dealing with things that we thought were very important, like COVID response, procurement, collective bargaining, criminal and justice reform, transportation, and other important bills. With the surge in Omicron and Governor Hogan now declaring a state of emergency, our next upcoming session, of course, will again be very challenging. But I just want to provide you with some of my own bills that I'll be working on, and then let my wonderful colleagues speak on their bills that they're going to do this session. As you know, early in the 2021 session, the General Assembly overrode the governor's veto of one of my bills, SB 208, that passed in 2020, that would require background checks on the private sales of long guns and shotguns. This new law closes a major loophole and will help hopefully prevent gun violence, tragedies, and suicides by preventing violent criminals and domestic abusers, or those that are not allowed to have guns under the law, to obtain them at gun shows, online, or other ways. But this law would be meaningless if we can't pass a law that I will be introducing, or legislation that I will be introducing in the 2022 session. So this 2022 session, myself, Delegate Leslie Lopez, and our wonderful Attorney General Brian Frosch will be introducing a bill to regulate the use of what they call ghost guns. These are guns that can be assembled from different parts. You can order them online. They do not require background checks, and they lack serial numbers, and they are untraceable and used increasingly in violent crimes. And we also had some instances where law enforcement discovered somebody manufacturing ghost guns in Montgomery County. You can believe that. I will also be introducing bills to fight domestic violence, human trafficking, and child abuse. And again, I will be introducing my bill to repeal marriage as a defense to sex crimes. Under this archaic law, unmarried couples have more rights than married couples, and that's not great family values. I also have a bill to prevent a protective parent from losing custody or visitation when that protected parent raises concern about child abuse. That often happens when you have single moms who don't have a lot of resources to hire an attorney. So we want to be able to at least let them raise some reasonable concerns if they believe that the other parent hasn't been engaged in child abuse, so the child does not get sent back to an abusive situation. And following on the many bills I've passed to address something called stalking, I'll also be introducing a bill to have our law enforcement trained in stalking, particularly electronic surveillance and tracking. This is new technology that is now increasingly used by domestic abusers to stalk victims and invade their privacy. And then building on the laws I passed to make strangulation a first-degree felony, a law to shield the addresses of witnesses to domestic violence and to prosecute child predators. I also have several bills to provide protections to those victims of domestic violence and child abuse and neglect. And if you want to go, you can go on my website to see those bills, because there are a lot of them, and I don't think we have enough time to discuss every single one of them, but they are designed to help the victims. And following on the heels of the passage of my bill, the True Freedom Act, that allows human trafficking victims to vacate nonviolent minor offenses committed as a result of being trafficked. I'm introducing a safe harbor bill to prevent child sex trafficking victims from being prosecuted for similar offenses that they committed because they were a victim of human trafficking and compelled to do that by their traffickers. And then also the bill would connect these child victims to vital services to enable them to escape their traffickers and recover and rebuild their lives. And of course, as you know, as the history of America is incomplete without including the history of people of all different backgrounds who have made major contributions to building America, Delegate C.T. Wilson and I will have a bill to allow for the expansion of education curriculum to also include the history of Blacks, Latinos, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, women, and other groups that have not been featured as much in our history books. I want to highlight two of my cybersecurity bills that just became laws that will help us fight cyber attacks in 2022. As you know, ransomware can devastate the operations of our government, economy, hospitals, infrastructures, and the General Assembly finally, after 4 years, passed my bill to proactively deter, fight, and prosecute the very malicious possession and use of ransomware that can shut down our local governments, our economy, financial, commercial institutions, and critical infrastructures. So this law also increases penalties for attacks against our local governments, our utilities, hospitals, and school systems. And as you heard, ransomware is all over the place. You remember hearing about the Colonial Pipeline attack, the recent intrusion and shutdown of Baltimore City's operations and 911 systems, the Baltimore County Public Schools and the Salisbury Police Department, and hospitals, which some we don't know about, all which have cost millions of dollars to resume operations and recover and restore vital data. And with the surge in local governments being attacked, the General Assembly finally passed another of my bills to enable the Maryland Department of Information Technology to provide critical assistance and guidance to localities in developing proactive cybersecurity strategic plans and the identification of vulnerabilities and other measures to prevent, protect, and respond to cyber attacks. And as co-chair of the Maryland Cybersecurity Council Subcommittee on Law and Policy, I'll continue my work to increase cybersecurity. As you know, it impacts every aspect of our life. In particular, in the 2022 session, I plan again to introduce my Maryland Online Consumer Privacy and Child Safety Act, which is modeled after a recently enacted California law. This law would prohibit companies from collecting, selling, transferring, or altering or misusing our sensitive information without our consent, with an automatic ban on the collection of personal information of children 16 and under without their or their parents' consent. Children are our most precious and our most vulnerable. We need to protect them, and hopefully this law will do it if it gets passed. As you know, it's been shown that social media companies are not only using our personal information and data to develop profiles on us, but also to manipulate behavior. So it's our responsibility to protect our citizens. I think Ariana or Sarah may comment on the legislature introducing the Time to Care Act, and they could probably talk about more of the particulars of the act. This is legislation that will be before Senate and House that creates a family and medical leave insurance program to allow hardworking individuals to take up to 12 weeks, not years, 12 weeks of paid leave to enable them to take care of themselves or a family member. And this is very critical, especially during our pandemic. Again, I'd like to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Delegate Mark Foreman, and to give him an opportunity to provide us with what he's going to be doing. And again, thank you for the honor and privilege of being able to serve you in the Maryland State Senate.
Thank you, Senator Lee. It's our second Zoom doing it together, so I feel like we're a very familiar tag team. It's usually not more than one a day, but today we've got back-to-back Zooms. So it's good to be with you, Senator, and with our District 16 friends. I do want to mention that I think Ariana's Chief of Staff is on, Sharon. So if there are questions for Ariana, I'm sure they'll be brought back to her. And Ariana's been a terrific resource during the pandemic, in particular around the vaccine and access to the vaccine and testing. So thanks to her on her work there. And of course, congratulations to her, as Senator Lee said, on her wedding. And she got to get married in Hawaii, which is even better. It's not just getting married, it's getting married in Hawaii. I also, as long as we're doing sort of congratulatory notes, I just wanted to mention that today, the Maryland Board of Public Works met, and it was the first meeting since, I believe, 2003, that former District 16 delegate Nancy Kopp was not the state treasurer for. Nancy Kopp retired after a long career as state treasurer, and before that, I think about 25 years as a delegate for District 16. So we really salute her and her great work for the state of Maryland. I'll just say, I think we all are having a little bit of a time warp maybe with what's going on with COVID lately. So I just want to acknowledge that I think the frustration a lot of us are feeling at what's, frankly, a very difficult time again. And in some ways it was predictable because, the virus, has consistently been worse in the winter. And in some ways it's really frustrating and unpredictable because I think we thought with vaccinations, we'd be sort of past the difficult point we're at now. And hopefully this is going to be a short-lived wave, as it's been in some other places that have faced it, but it's definitely a challenge. And I'll just mention for those with kids, I know we've all heard a lot from folks today, like my kid who's saying hi, with folks in the public school system who are really concerned about whether the public schools are going to be able to continue to serve our population. So I don't know if there are questions about that. We can get to those, but I just wanted to acknowledge that because as far as we've come in the 2 years and as used to we've gotten to being on Zoom, it's still incredibly challenging. And obviously some people are really still facing some significant health and accompanying economic effects. I'm going to run through some issues, and I feel like I always talk about the same major topics when I'm with you all, although they develop over time. And I just want to be clear, that's not to say that we don't all work on a large variety of issues. But when we're with you all, I think we all like to share our most relevant expertise, which tend to be the committees that we serve on. The way Annapolis is organized, as I've said many times before, is we are all on one committee. So unlike Capitol Hill, where Jamie Raskin might be on 3 or 4 committees, or Senator Van Hollen, we all serve on one committee each. And in my case, as Elliot said, it's the Appropriations Committee. And I chair the subcommittee on transportation and the environment. So I am currently spending quite a bit of my time on issues related to the budget and issues related to infrastructure. On the budget, I'll just mention most of the years I've been in the legislature, all the years I've been in the legislature, the budget's been a pretty tough issue. We have to have a balanced budget every year in the state of Maryland. We don't have our own central bank or government printing presses. And so we need to balance the budget every year, which has required a lot of difficult choices. And every year I've been there until now. Frankly, thanks to the federal government really stepping up during the first year and a half of the pandemic, the budget situation is a lot better off than I think anybody expected. Now that's nice for the government's balance sheet, but the reason that matters to all of you is that tells us what kind of services we can provide to Marylanders. And I think if you had asked folks a year and a half ago what the budget was going to look like in 2022, I think there would have been a question about how many parks we were going to close, how many days a week, and how many teachers we were going to have to lay off. And thankfully, we're not in that position. We're projecting at least some short-term surpluses on the government on the government's books. So that's very positive and presents some opportunities for us, like refilling our state's rainy day fund, paying some unfunded liabilities that the state has had, and some other sort of more limited expenses. Construction is a good one because it's a good use of cash, but doesn't create huge ongoing operating costs the way creating, say, a new healthcare program would, even though that could also be extremely important. I'm mostly focused these days on 2 sort of pools of infrastructure. One is schools, and the other is, of course, transportation. On the schools front, we've reported to you all over the last few years about some great success Montgomery County's had in increasing our allocation of school construction dollars from the state of Maryland. That's very positive. We passed a bill a couple of years ago called the Built to Learn Act, which uses our state casino revenue to bond that money to provide more school construction dollars to our local jurisdictions. That's really important for Montgomery County because when the kids are in school, which hopefully will be more of the case going forward here.
And I go to school, by the way.
And my son wants to know he goes to school, by the way, obviously. When the kids are in school more consistently, the schools are pretty crowded, particularly in our area. So we've had some great success increasing the allocation for Montgomery County, but there are still some details we need to work out to make sure Montgomery County is able to sort of meet its match, because those are matching dollars where the county government has to step up pretty significantly as well. And also, I believe that the dollars we're investing of taxpayers should be invested in an environmentally sustainable way. And that means at this point, if we're building a new school or replacing the school's energy system, I believe we should be doing it in a green and renewable and sustainable way. And so I have legislation this coming session that would no longer allow state dollars to go towards schools that are basically relying on a fossil fuel generation system. If schools have that, that's one thing. I'm not saying they all need to be ripped out tomorrow, but if we're investing in a new energy system at a new school or a rehab school, there's no reason to make that kind of long-term investment if it's not renewable and sustainable at this point. So if the localities want to do that, that's up to them and their taxpayers. But from a state level, I have a bill that would stop providing state resources for that purpose. On the transportation front, obviously I spend a lot of time on oversight of some of the mega projects going on in the state, including the highway project, which I suspect there'll be some questions on, the governor's proposed expansion of 495 and 270, the Purple Line, which there should be a new construction partner picking up the work there starting later this month. So that's a positive turn in what's been a very, I shouldn't say bumpy road, I guess bumpy track in the case of the Purple Line. And right now we have some great opportunities because the federal government has passed a very large infrastructure bill. And so there'll be some great discussion over how to apply that money. There's about $4.5 billion just in formula funds coming to us for highways and bridges. There's a little less than $2 billion just in formula funds coming for transit. There's $100 million in formula funds coming for broadband. There's over $800 million coming for clean water resources. There's $65 million coming for electric vehicle chargers. And those are just the formulas. There's also a lot of grant programs that have been created by the infrastructure bill. And so we'll be having a big debate during the legislative session about how we want to sort of access and spend that money and make that investment. And I'll also have some separate legislation on infrastructure topics, including attempting to replicate something Virginia's done, which is create a rail authority to really focus our state government on investing in rail infrastructure, commuter rail and passenger rail infrastructure, as well as revising a bill we passed last session on transitioning our bus fleet, our state bus fleet, the Maryland Transit Administration's 800 bus fleet to zero emissions. There's a little bit of cleanup we have to do on that legislation to make sure that we're taking care of sort of the workers who are responsible for maintaining that bus fleet. So tons of other topics I know you all want to talk about, and we'll hopefully get to those in the Q&A. But with that, let me turn it over to Delegate Love, and just note that Elliot referred to her as our sort of newest delegate, but it's really sort of hard to think of her as new. She's a 4-year veteran and has been a real leader on the Environment and Transportation Committee. And so let me turn it over to Delegate Love.
And the spell got.
Thank you, Delegate Corman, and thank you, Harrison. I was like being the newest delegate because I get to go last. And for some reason, I always enjoy that. I think we're an incredibly lucky district because we have such an amazing team. And one of the things that I really love is the diverse perspective that we can bring back to you all and the services that we can give you all. Because we're all only on one committee and we all serve on different committees, it's, I think, a real asset for District 16 with, as we've said, Senator Lee on judicial proceedings, Delegate Kelly on health and government operations, Delegate Corman on appropriations, and me on environment and transportation. It's been a great run so far. I'm really enjoying it. I continue to love my job, and thank you all so much for putting me here. It's going to be a really interesting session. It's an election year, which always weighs on people's minds. It's a year in which we will not have the opportunity to override the governor's vetoes. So the first order of business when we reconvene after interim is to override the governor's vetoes. Well, Governor Hogan won't be in office next January, so we won't have that opportunity. So that's a really interesting question as people go through the legislative process. What bills do we want to pass, given that we're not going to have the override opportunity that we always do in January? I've got a couple of bills that I'd like to highlight for all of you. Those of you who get my newsletter, and if you don't, just let me know, because I'd love to add you to my list, as would, I know, Delegate Corman and Senator Lee and Delegate Kelly. I find it's a great way to keep in touch with people, to let you know what's going on in your state government. But if you get my newsletters, then you've heard a lot of these before. I know that it takes some bills a long time, and I'm hoping for some of mine that, you know, year 4 is the magic number. So I continue to focus, as I have, on the environment and on civil rights and civil liberties. So I'll start with the civil rights and civil liberties topic. For many, many years, even before I was in the legislature, when I was with the ACLU of Maryland, the topic of privacy has been one that I have focused on and cared about a lot. And I have a bill that passed the House a couple years ago, and because it was our first session of COVID, it died in the Senate. It ran out of time. Big tech got wind of it, and they fought hard last year. And now we have a really great coalition coming together to push this bill again. And what it is it's a bill that would protect our biometrics. Our biometrics are unique biological characteristics that identify only us: our fingerprint, our iris scan, our face print. Right now, there are absolutely no rules regarding our biometrics. Let me say that again. There are no rules regarding our biometrics. Companies can collect them without our consent, without our knowledge. I went into the Target a couple months ago, and at the checkout, they have a camera. Now, I don't know if that's just a security camera or if they're running facial recognition on me. So that means they're gathering my face print. So they can take our biometrics without our consent, without our knowledge. There are no parameters on what they can do with them. They can sell them, they can trade them, they can profit off of them, they can, you know, put them out on the World Wide Web. I mean, there really are no parameters. It is terrifying. So my bill would require unambiguous written consent. It would require that they not profit off of them. It would require a retention and destruction schedule. And it would also allow individuals to sue if the companies did not follow that. That's been a point of contention with the companies. They don't like that at all, because, you know, they don't want to be sued, and I understand that. But in the 2 states where there isn't what's called a private right of action, this law hasn't been enforced at all. In Illinois, where there is a private right of action, companies are changing their behavior. They are getting consent. They are doing the things that they should do. So hopefully that this will be the year for that bill. On the environmental front, a couple of bills that you've seen before. I continue my quest to reduce our overuse of single-use plastics. I continue to work with a whole range of stakeholders on amending our Maryland Recycling Act. It was groundbreaking in the 1980s when we passed it. And we've sort of tinkered on the edges since then, but we actually haven't sat down and said, okay, are we counting what matters, or are we counting to count? So we're going to take a big view, big overhaul, big perspective, I don't know what I'm trying to say, on the Maryland Recycling Act. Another one that I've had for a couple of years relates to PFAS. That stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And every time I can say that, I'm really proud of myself. Basically, this is a chemical, a synthetic chemical that is in so many things that you don't even think about. It started with Teflon. And if any of you have seen the documentary Dark Waters, it chronicles the poison that PFAS from that was in Teflon poisoned the West Virginia community and the lawyer that took the company on. PFAS is in firefighting foam, it's in food packaging, it's in rugs and carpets. Basically, it creates that barrier. If you think about a cardboard container, takeout container for food, there's that sort of plasticky layer that keeps the grease and the food from landing in your lap. That contains PFAS. So there are lots of other products out there that can be used and should be used because PFAS is connected with a lot of health issues, cancer, low birth weight, and on and on. So Senator Elfreth and I have a bill that would, it's one of the priorities for the firefighters. It would prohibit the use of intentionally added PFAS in firefighting foam, prohibit the landfilling or incineration of PFAS, ban it in rugs and carpets and food packaging. And lest you think we would hurt companies, a lot of companies are actually moving that way. Cava, Trader Joe's, McDonald's, there's a whole list, Home Depot. This is something that the federal government is paying attention to, states across the country are paying attention to. It's a really big and important topic, and I'm hoping that we can get that passed this year. Two other quick things that I want to touch on. I sit on, as Elliot mentioned, the Chesapeake Bay Commission, which is a tri-state legislative body to address the Chesapeake Bay. And it's wonderful because there are legislators from Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania who sit down and we talk about how can we protect the Bay? This is what we're doing in our state. What are you doing in your state? And we've gotten a lot of really great ideas. And one of the things that I will be sponsoring this year is a bill called the Comprehensive Conservation Finance Act. And the short description of that is it's to bring private investment to help blue and green infrastructure to help environmental projects. And the reason I raised the CBC is because we've been talking a lot with Pennsylvania. So much of the pollution in the Chesapeake Bay comes down from Pennsylvania. And Maryland can only do so much, and we do a lot. But rather than hammering our neighbors to the north, part of what the CCFA will do is enable assistance that we can actually help Pennsylvania meet some of their goals. And last but not least, I promised Delegate Kelly I would bring this up. Delegate Kelly is sponsoring, and I am her wingwoman, on an abortion care access bill in light of what is happening at the Supreme Court in Texas, in a number of other states across the country where women's bodily autonomy is being taken away from them. We in Maryland feel very strongly that we need to be a state that values women's right to choose. So this is a great bill that we are looking forward to working on. And she has been an incredible leader on this bill, and I'm really excited for it. So, wow, my the CDC PFAS fact sheet. Thank you, Michael. That's fantastic. So with that, I will stop and I look forward to your questions. Thanks so much.
Okay, well, thank you, Senator Lee and Delegates Corman and Love. And I will start in with the questions. Some of what I'm going to be, some of what I'm going to be stating in the questions you've already covered, but to the extent you want to add anything that you haven't already said that may be relevant, feel free to add to that. It's probably easier just to ask the whole question. Starting with, so how might leadership changes and the influx of federal funds affect the legislative priorities? And in particular, you mentioned grant programs funded by federal infrastructure. And so I realize some of that's been answered already, but to the extent it hasn't, somebody can answer that.
Yeah, I think the leadership makes a difference when you have, and I think that we've had a change, as you have seen, of leadership. I know, at least in the Senate, we have now Bill Ferguson as the president, Melanie Griffin as the president pro tem, and we also have two Montgomery County people, myself, Majority Whip, and Nancy King as the majority leader. And also we have Will Smith as the chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, along with Jeffrey Wallstreicher as its vice chair. But we also have Brian Feldman as vice chair of the Finance Committee, which has made a really big difference. And I think now with the influx of money, I think that we can pass some of our more progressive priorities and that we've been wanting to do, but there was no funding for it. Particularly, I'm hoping that that we're able to use not just the surplus, but funds from the American Rescue Act for things dealing with domestic violence, like VOCA, for instance, because Governor Hogan cut our grants by 20%. Although he has said he will direct 14 million back into these grants, that's still not enough, and we haven't seen the money yet. I think what we need to shoot for, not only to get benchmark for things like VOCA that deals with domestic violence, but we also need to use more federal money. This is just some of the things. We have a lot of things that now we can fund that we didn't, and we're hoping that we can direct more money towards COVID relief too. And also bills that maybe didn't get out before now can get out because they'll have the adequate funding. And I know Mark and Sarah want to add something too.
Sure. So I'll put on my parochial Montgomery County hat for a moment. One of my responsibilities in the legislature is to chair the 24-member Montgomery County House delegation. We're the largest delegation in the state. We edge out Prince George's County by one delegate. And, we have a really well-positioned delegation. Chair Kumar Barve from District 17, Rockville Gaithersburg is the chair of one of our 6 standing committees. Delegate Lukey, who represents District 14, is the majority leader. Delegate Wilkins is our House parliamentarian. Lots of other folks in various roles as subcommittee chairs and other positions. I would say the overall context, though, is it's not just the leadership changes, the churn in the legislature among the leaders, but among just the rank and file members has been pretty significant the last 2 election cycles. Delegate Love's class was very large, and my class the cycle before that was very large. And I would say with that has been a pretty significant shift in ideology. It's a much more capital D Democratic body than it was even when I started 8 years ago. One of the opportunities, just since you mentioned, you sort of tied that together with the increase in funds, I mentioned we're looking for some sort of one-time uses of funds. Last year, we passed a really important bill that Senator Lee was a leader on access to counsel for those facing eviction. We passed the sort of program, but not the funding source. So we're now about $12 million behind in how we were supposed to fund that. So funding that for a year out of the cash we have is an example of sort of a progressive step we can take. That's much more possible now because of all the change we've seen in the makeup of the General Assembly. So that's just one example.
Delegate Love, did you want to add anything? Okay. We'll go into the substantive category of education and young people. So there are 2 questions here. Requests for an update on public school funding, and also, are there any bills related to childcare programs or preschools that will help working parents afford their childcare and preschool programs, especially if the federal government Build Back Better bill doesn't pass?
So I could talk a little bit about that before handing it off to my colleagues. I think a lot of you know that 2 years ago, we passed what's called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. This was the culmination of a comprehensive process that had been going on for many years to try to assess not only how we're funding schools, but what we're funding in the schools. So things like expanding pre-K opportunities and expanding, increasing pay to draw more highly qualified teachers, providing more resources for students who need it the most, like those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, English as a second language, those with special needs, and a host of other really important priorities. The debate, though, that you heard in the press and from politicians was almost entirely about the cost and the funding. And that's another example of where the budgets put us in a really good position because of some difficult decisions we made on tax revenue, but the right decisions. If you look out until fiscal year 2029, which is a long time from now in terms of budgeting, that program is fully paid for. We have adequate revenue to fund what we want to fund on schools. Now, look, those revenue projections, they come and they go. So I'm not saying I'm not going to have to be on a Zoom or hopefully in person talking to you in 2 or 3 years, and it's still going to be FY29. Those things can ebb and flow. But sitting here today, it looks very positive on the funding of those education programs. And I'll just briefly repeat, and really Senator Lee and Delegate Love have been more involved with this than I have. But we did do 2 things in the last few years to help with childcare costs in particular. One is we have a radically expanded earned income tax credit that we passed last year, which is really important for working families with kids. And a couple of years before that, we passed an increase in the childcare subsidy. I know Delegate Solomon in the adjoining District 18 and many others are working on legislation this coming year more focused on the sort of provider side and expanding access and helping with costs. But let me turn it over to my colleagues.
As usual, Mark, you nailed it. I have nothing to add.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Mark said about about providing individuals who are facing eviction. We, as he indicated, we passed a right to counsel, the access to counsel for low-income individuals facing eviction, but we weren't able to do the funding mechanism. But we're hoping that there was a task force too, and they're recommending that money be used from the American Rescue Act. And also, I think leadership strongly supports that too now, I believe. So things like that may pass, and I'm hoping that the Paid Family Leave Act also, the Time to Care Act is able to pass because we may have now more resources. But I wish Delegate Kelly was here because she knows a lot about the particulars of that bill. And anyway, well, we're working very hard, and we welcome your input too on some of the priorities that you think are important too.
Okay. Are there any bills that focus on women in jails or shelters to assure them that their personal health care needs are met?
Yeah, there were some bills during the last sessions that dealt with actually providing, I don't know how to say, things like women's sanitary products in jails, in detention centers, because when women in incarcerated facilities have always been treated unequally, including services that they would get when they are going to be released. And there was a bill that passed, I believe it was Senator Mary Washington's bill, to make sure there's more equity in pre-release or release services once they're able to get out, and when they leave prison, that they have the same kind of resources and kind of support system that is provided to male inmates. And of course, the governor had vetoed that bill, and we overrode the veto of that bill. So there's more that needs to be done because some of these programs do lack funding. And we're hoping that some of the federal funding will be able to get down to help these individuals be able to recover and rebuild their lives too.
And do you support proposed, oh, did you have something you want to add, Mark? No. Okay. Do you support proposed legislation on reporting abortion statistics to the CDC?
So Kathy, thank you for this question. We've discussed this on email. Unfortunately, that goes through the Health and Government Operations Committee. Delegate Kelly is not here, so I am not going to speak for her.
Okay. And we can circle back to that question if Delegate Kelly can make it onto the call tonight. So three questions on transportation infrastructure. They're unrelated, so I'll ask them one at a time. How can we stop the Hogan Highway widening?
I guess that's to me, ladies.
Have at it, Mark.
All right, so really quick, because I do like 3-hour webinars on this. The project is in the pre-development phase on the contracting side, the public-private partnership contractor side, and it's in the draft supplemental environmental impact stage on the environmental review side. They expect that sometime this year, the final environmental impact statement will come out, and at that time, they plan to go to that body I mentioned earlier, the Board of Public Works, in order to obtain approval to go forward with the first section, the construction contracts for the first section. So the only body that needs to vote on these next steps is the Board of Public Works, which is made up of 3 members: the governor, we know his position on this, the comptroller, and the state treasurer. So I would advocate, I would suggest you advocate, I would advocate that you advocate to the state treasurer and the comptroller. The state treasurer is appointed by the legislature and has the prior state treasurer consistently voted with some skepticism on this project. The comptroller has been sort of a middle position. He has made some demands to try and bring a little bit of sanity to the project, not as far as many of us would like to see him go, but he has helped improve the project. And as recently as today, he actually expressed skepticism about the project now that the Maryland Secretary of Transportation is changing. So that's the body that needs to act on this before it can go forward. The legislature, surprisingly, does not need to vote on this project. Now, the House of Delegates has voted for at least 3 years on legislation to try to bring some sanity to this. And unfortunately, our friends in the Senate, although through no fault of Susan, she's had legislation of her own to try to help with this project, has not seen fit to join us. But the only body that needs to vote is what's called the Board of Public Works. So the treasurer and the comptroller are really the key players there. So I hope that answers the question at least somewhat succinctly.
Thank you. Next question is, can you update us on what is happening or what should be happening with 5G and small cell towers at the state level? How are federal funds affecting this issue compared to, for example, wired broadband?
So I'm definitely not an expert on how the broadband infrastructure funds are being used. So I don't know if Senator Lee or Delegate Love has more expertise in that. On the zoning issues related to it, which is what comes up quite a bit, you know, for a number of years, there's been legislation proposed at the state to preempt local zoning, and those bills have not gone forward. So that's been one of the big issues we've dealt with. I'm not sure I really know about anything, how the sort of the infrastructure funds can be used on wireline versus wired offhand, but we could certainly look at what the rules for those particular programs are. But I don't know offhand, to be honest with you.
Okay. And the next question is also for Delegate Corman, because it has to do with Metro. And it's what's happening with funding, maintenance, and what headways are being made with the Metro.
Okay, I feel like someone's just trying to get on my good side by asking that question. So, you know, obviously the Metro system is being currently battered by 2 crises. One is COVID. I mean, it's just had a huge effect on ridership. Discretionary ridership, not surprisingly, maybe is way down. Now, if you're a Lifeline rider, if you're a Metro rider, because you don't have another option, you know, Metro is still there, thankfully. But for a lot of discretionary riders, it's just not being used. And, you know, frankly, when you look at our district, a lot of the riders have been working professionals in DC. I used to see Elliot on the train actually as he was heading down to his white collar office job in DC and I was heading down to mine. A lot of the white collar workers are not commuting in to their offices. Certainly they're not commuting in 5 days a week between 9 and 6 p.m. And a lot of them, when they are going in, are able to drive because the parking and traffic in the city is very different right now than it was pre-COVID. The second crisis is there's just some significant issues with Metro and its management that continue to dog us. For those of you who pay close attention to this, you probably saw that about half of their rail cars were pulled out of service over safety issues we can talk more about. The system always needs adequate resources, but I would submit that we're not underfunding the Metro system we had. Now, we may be underfunding the Metro system we want going forward in the future, but the state of Maryland is putting about $500 million in to the Metro system. That's a significant, every year, that's a significant amount of money. There are some tweaks that need to be made to that, and we can talk about those for people who are really interested in going into the weeds, and I have a bill on it. But a lot of it is about getting through COVID and continuing that really difficult task of providing adequate oversight to Metro. And again, we could talk a lot about why it's so difficult to do. I think it was a really smart move by the state to put the Secretary of Transportation on the Metro board, because that is a real watchdog to try to provide more oversight over the system. The Secretary of Transportation is departing, a new person's coming in. I hope the new secretary is as active a board member as the prior secretary, because that's where the sort of rubber hits the road with Metro, is that board that's in charge of overseeing the management there. It's not something the governor controls directly. It's not something that the county council controls directly. It's this board that the governor appoints members to that's really the key to getting their sort of management in a better position.
Okay, we're going to now move on to taxes. Is there any work to make the income tax more progressive, particularly to fund education? And are there any other changes in the horizon for Maryland's tax code?
I suspect one of my colleagues may know more than I do. This is an issue that goes through the Ways and Means Committee, so I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that one of our colleagues, Delegate Polakovich Carr, is really focused on tax issues and fairness issues. So I wouldn't be surprised if she brought back a couple of bills on this topic, but I don't know if my colleagues know more on that.
Yeah, I think over the years, my colleagues and I have always supported bills to make the tax system more progressive and more fair, including having corporations that do business, big corporations, multi-million-dollar corporations, pay their fair share of taxes. And I think we are continued to be committed to that. I am not on that committee that oversees that. I believe in the Senate side, we Senate, the budget and taxation. But we could get back to you on legislation that we know is coming in the 2022 session and about the particulars, and just let us know if you want us to contact you on that, or contact us. You know how to get us, and you are at, Senator Susan at Lee at state.md.us, and Mark and Sarah put their contact information on the chat too.
We'll just mention one bill we overrode the veto on when we met last month, which relates to the local income tax, the piggyback tax, which is heavily controlled by the state. Montgomery County and no county can just sort of do what they want. It's capped by the state. And until now, it had to be a flat local income tax. So even though we have a progressive state income tax that was sort of made progressive in 2007, Senator Lee was in the House at the time, the local income tax had to be flat. The same rate had to apply to everybody. We passed a bill that allows the counties to actually create a progressive local piggyback tax. And so that might get a little at what the question is after, at least as to the local income tax. At the state level, at various, we've had a progressive income tax since about 2007. At various times, there have been other tiers that we don't have right now. But again, for reasons I said earlier, there's not a ton of pressure right now to raise revenue. We made some tough choices on that about 2 years ago. So I'd be surprised to see significant action in this upcoming legislative session, just given the current budget picture.
Okay. Next question. has to do with redistricting. Do you believe that Maryland's new congressional districts are now more fair or less fair? And related to that is what's going to happen with Maryland's state legislative districts?
Susan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I could start off, and I think each of us will comment on it was not easy going back in special session to pass HB1, but it does fulfill the General Assembly's responsibility to pass a congressional map after receiving the new census data. I think that we passed a map that was cleaner, more compact districts than the current map, and demonstrates our commitment to the Federal Voting Rights Act. By ensuring that our minority voters retain their ability to elect their preferred candidates, particularly like in the 4th and the 7th district that contains, and we also have 3 majority minority districts. And the plan ensures the continuity of representation by keeping the majority of Marylanders in their current districts. And there's, of course, there is no perfect plan. The best plan would be have a federal redistricting plan instead of all this patchwork, because no party is going to disarm themselves. And the best thing would be pass the federal legislation. And such legislation was just proposed by our wonderful US Senator Chris Van Hollen, who then asked Governor Larry Hogan to support this legislation, but he did not get a response back from the governor. So I don't think the current state-by-state approach is the best way to go, but I think we need to do something on a federal level.
Okay. Next question. Can you give us a detailed breakdown on what's going to happen with legalizing, regulating, and taxing cannabis, and how can it be done in a way that is attentive to the racial injustices tied to the drug war?
I'd like everybody, all of us should have an opportunity to comment on this. I think that if we do legalize it, it'll probably be done by a constitutional amendment and a ballot measure that'll go before our voters. I think there's legislation right now in the House and Senate dealing with putting it on the ballot. But if we do legalize it, I think we also have to regulate it and treat it like any other thing like alcohol, to be able to tax it and to regulate it and have guidelines so that it is used safely too. But also the revenue goes to things like education and healthcare and other priorities. And also we have to make, there was a question about racial inequality. What was that about now? Forgot.
Yeah, can it be done in a way that's attentive to the racial injustices tied to the drug war? The war on drugs, I guess is what
the drug war has, adversely impacted a lot of communities of color, particularly Black and Brown communities. And I think that, this is a whole new, different issue too that we have to address. And that's something, because they are the most impacted. But I want to give my colleagues also an opportunity to speak to this, because I know that they've been working on it too. But anyway, thank you for that question too, because that's going to be, I forgot to mention that will be an issue before the 2022 session.
Yeah, the speaker put together a work group on this topic. And one of the key things that they were looking at is how do we provide equity in opening up this new market? Because as the question noted, and as Senator Lee noted, the way our drug laws have been enforced have been really racially unfair. And one of the challenges is, a lot of people, as they're looking at this, other states, they exclude if you have a cannabis related conviction, then you're not allowed to be in the market. Well, that's not fair. that doesn't make sense. If you are over enforcing in a certain community, you can't then say that community can't be a part of the new market. So I know that the speakers work group spent a lot of time on that over the summer, and that, you know, we don't know the exact details of what the structure is going to look like. We do have a number of other states that we can look at, that I know the work group did look at, for to-dos and to-don'ts, models that have worked, that are working, models that are not working. And so, as I mentioned in the chat, there's a bill, HB1, that is dealing with this, and it will be I know, a very hot topic in the legislature starting next week.
Yeah, and you know, following up on what Doug and Love said, we're looking at those forward to seeing in detail, in particular, those recommendations made by that work group, because they were working on this during the interim, and they were tackling very substantive issues like inequality. So we're looking forward to looking at, and also seeking your input too, once we are able to evaluate all and review all the findings of that work group.
I mean, I'll just briefly add, there are sort of three main elements that I can sort of think of on the racial disparity issue. One is, how do you deal with records? I mean, Delegate Love referenced it in the context who can be in the industry, but setting aside who's in the industry, if someone was arrested or charged 30 years ago for a marijuana-related or cannabis-related offense, and we're now saying that's not such a big deal, do you go back and do something about their record? You know, just to how they're being impacted now, that's not going to make up for 30 years, but at least for now, you can expunge their record or do some kind of correction on their record. The second is, when you do sort of programs in an industry to try to support particular communities, you have to have a really well done disparity study to back it up. Otherwise, it's not going to pass constitutional muster. So we sort of need to make sure that's happening for the recreational side of the industry. That's something we were sort of late to getting to on the medical side. And so there was a lot of consternation from a lot of communities of color that there was not a program set up from the start on the medical side for disadvantaged communities, or communities of color, excuse me. And the disparity study was just late in coming. And so we need to sort of do that earlier in this stage. And then finally, the use of any revenue that comes from it is part of this also. That hypothetical person I mentioned a few minutes ago who did something 30 years ago, yeah, we should clean up their record now, but they have 30 years of having that on their record, and who knows how that's affected their lifestyle or their family's life. And so there's things we can do with the revenue to at least try to make amends for that. You can never undo history until you get a DeLorean, but you know, we can at least try to make an effort to make things a little bit right.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Can you tell us about the removal of Patuxent Riverkeeper Fred Tutman from the River Commission? Are there efforts to challenge the governor on this?
That is really, really disturbing. Fred is an amazing man, and he has served as a riverkeeper for a really long time. And I've worked with him on a couple of bills. There are conversations going on right now. I don't know what's going to come of it, but there are a number of us who are really appalled at that move.
Thank you. Have you considered legislation to allow human composting as an eco-friendly alternative to embalming or cremation?
I have not heard of such a bill this session, but so far we only have the 200 pre-files. We haven't seen the other, 2,800 that will come in the next month or so.
And can you tell us about extended producer responsibility for single-use food wrapping? How can we move even beyond that?
So extended producer responsibility, EPR, is a really great concept that Maine passed a couple of years ago, and Delegate Brooke Learman has brought for the last couple of, actually last year was her first year. She's bringing it back this year. And basically it sets up this system where producers have to, somewhat of a complex system, but basically the more packaging you have, the more you have to pay into this system. And so it really incentivizes companies to reduce their packaging and to work on R&D to have better and more environmentally friendly packaging. So it's a great concept and we're really digging into it. So hopefully we'll make some movement on that this year.
Thank you, Delegate Love. Going to change topics to elections. What kind of election reforms are in store? For example, ranked choice voting, public financing of state races, changes to the primary election structure, universal vote by mail, or other changes?
I put in the chat, I'll touch ranked choice voting. Last year, the Montgomery County House delegation passed ranked choice voting. And it's coming back this year. I anticipate, we'll pass it out of the House delegation again and see where it goes from there.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll just follow up briefly.
Go ahead, Mo.
We did pass a number of bills in the last legislative session on access to voting, going the opposite direction of many state legislatures to expand the franchise. We now have, for example, you can opt into receiving your vote by mail ballot every election. So that's not full, universal mail-in voting, but it's a step in that direction, and a host of other reforms that we passed, sort of the opposite of a lot of the headlines that have been in the news.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think that the success of the mail-in ballot is produced the ability for us to pass a bill that would allow every voter to receive an application to receive a ballot. I think with COVID still raging, especially the variant, it's important that we have the ability to vote by mail. And as Delegate Corman said, this is going to expand the access to voting. And we also passed a legislation to increase the number of early voting sites and also guidelines on where you're going to put the drop boxes and to make sure it's equitable distribution. But we're continuing to work on when other states are trying to limit voting rights, we are increasing access to voting.
Next questions. Do you expect any action on vaping policy or regulation? Is there anything you think should be done?
I haven't heard any movements on vaping. I know we had a bill a couple of years ago on it, but I haven't heard any rumblings this session. I don't know if my colleague.
I mean, I was just going to note that vaping, so if you think about smoking as the top of the mountain, right? Vaping is on both sides. It's a gateway for some people and kind of an alternative to smoking. And for some people, it's a way to cease smoking. And so finding the sort of right regulatory framework for vaping, I think, has been a challenge for that reason, because for some people, it's a path away from cigarettes, and for other people, it can be a path into cigarettes. And so I think that's part of the policy challenge. But again, this is one of those questions where it'd be helpful if Delegate Kelly could follow up in the future, because I think a lot of that goes to her committee.
Okay. So on another healthcare question, we seem to be getting a lot of those, is how can we bring medication costs down?
Unfortunately, Delegate Kelly's not here. I know that's a big issue for her, but I know that in 2019, we passed legislation. I think it was, guys, correct me, was it HB 768, which created the Maryland Prescription Drugs Affordability Board. I think it was Maryland passed the first in the nation type of board so that we could examine prescription drug costs and how to limit it, and many other related issues. And I think this board is continuing to work on the issues such as this, but I would have preferred Delegate Kelly explaining some of the particulars of what has been done so far. Mark, and Sarah, did you want to add anything?
I mean, I think that's right. You hit on the first in the nation prescription drug pricing board, which was not funded for its first year because of the governor vetoing a bill. And so they were a little late getting started, but hopefully we'll start to see some work product out of them. And I know other states have been sort of copying that model of having a board that looks closely at what the sort of correct price point is. You want to capture, obviously, you want to price it so that there's incentive to do the research and right, get vaccines and get antivirals and all these other things. But you also want to make it accessible for people. And that's what that board's work is.
Okay, and we're still on the topic of healthcare. What do you think of Governor Hogan's pandemic response? What can the Assembly do to improve things, and in particular, perhaps in the testing area?
Well, unfortunately, in the past year, the vaccine rollout was rather slow, and from the governor and the Maryland Department of Health. And we in the Senate acted quickly by creating the Senate Vaccine Oversight Work Group, which is consisted of some of our, like Mary Washington, Senator Mary Washington, and Senator Clarence Lamb, who's actually a Johns Hopkins doctor and is very much an expert in this area. And that has helped provided some guidance. But it took a lot of advocacy and push from our delegation. Thank you, Mark Corman and Sarah Love, to finally get some a mass vaccination site in Montgomery County. And this should not be the case. We also push for more accountability and transparency, but we fortunately, we were able to get that mass vaccination site. But it was just slow in coming, and we don't want that to happen before. We passed during the 2021 session a series of several bills to deal with COVID, contact tracing, and testing. I think testing is an important issue, and I'm not so sure if I hope that the Department of Health and the governor is prepared for ensuring that we have enough testing and testing kits, because with this variant surging, it's become a very dangerous situation, and we need to be on top of this. The governor vetoed a bill dealing, it was a COVID-19, I think it's contact tracing. I don't have the exact name again, but you guys know what I'm talking about. He vetoed that bill, but we overrode it during the special session because our state needs to be prepared for this variant. And we have to have a rapid response, an effective response to the surge in this variant. And so I wish that Ariana was here because she worked very hard on this issue dealing with vaccine rollout and accountability and transparency. She did an excellent job, and she has kept us all updated on it. And she had it in her newsletter, updates that were very helpful to a lot of our constituents. So, but anyway, we did override a number of bills dealing with COVID-19 response because we just have to be prepared as a state.
Another question is, I know that I think Delegate Love mentioned the inability to override a veto at the start of the next legislative session in 2022. In 2023. This is 2022. But just like this year, the General Assembly did some veto overrides during the special session. Would that be possible towards the end of either during the summer or a lame duck session to do veto overrides?
Yeah, this is, oh, sorry, Senator Lee, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll just quickly say something. In the 2021 legislative session, we did veto overrides during the beginning and mid session. We did the veto override of one of my bills dealing with background checks on lawn guns and some other bills too. But in addition, we overrode 3 vetoes of 5 bills that dealt with historic police reforms. And then we came back later and during the special session and did several veto overrides. So anything is possible. Mark, did you want to add anything? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. Former House parliamentarian Bill Frick is on, so he can fact check me. But I think, the practice has been to try to get bills up to the governor early enough in the legislative session, if we want to make sure we can override them, that he vetoes them while we're in session. And I think he has 5 days during a normal legislative session to do that. So police reform is a great example of a bill that we didn't want to have to wait to override the veto. So we ensured that it was passed early enough in the legislative session that we could do the override before adjourning. It's always possible for us to reconvene in a special session, but unlike Virginia, which has like a regular veto override session, that's just not how we're structured in Maryland. It hasn't been historically.
Okay, well, thank you. And now there's only about 10 minutes left before closing time. I see in the chat, former Delegate Frick gave a thumbs up to Delegate Corman's explanation. So good job, Delegate Corman. And but anyway, now that we're down to just about 9 or 10 minutes left, I'll give everyone a chance to make some closing remarks. You're on mute.
First of all, thank you so much for letting us be able to speak with you today about our upcoming session. It's so important that you know what we're going to be doing in 2022, but we also think it's important to get your input on legislation and our priorities and what your priorities are too. As I noticed in the chat, I was trying to follow it, but also pay attention. There were a number of bills dealing with the environment. And I just wanted to say that we are going to be, Senator Penske and Delegate Barve will be introducing a package of comprehensive bills to deal with comprehensive climate change and also clean energy bills. And even though we weren't able to pass that major bill last year because there wasn't an agreement between the Senate and House on the major environmental bill, we're going to be revisiting that again, but we're going to be gung-ho on it and we're going to try to get those bills passed. But anyway, getting back to this, I just wanted to thank you for letting us represent and serve you in the Maryland General Assembly. And also I want to thank you for all the personal sacrifices that you made this year and last year in wearing masks, practicing social distancing, and not being able to see your children or your grandchildren during that period of time when we weren't vaccinated, and also letting us know how we could help you, but also getting vaccinated, which is very important. So we are here to serve you. Please contact us and let us know how you feel on pieces of legislation, what we should be doing. We take our work very seriously. We're always here to serve you. We all have an open door. And again, thank you for the honor and privilege of letting us serve you in the Maryland General Assembly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just ditto all that. Obviously, we did not get to every issue that's of importance to all of you individually, so feel free to follow up with us. And I'll just say that one of the silver linings of COVID is that it's made people realize that Annapolis is not that far away because it's just a Zoom away. And it's a lot easier to participate in our legislative process now, frankly, than it was pre-COVID. All of our floor sessions are streamed, all of our committee meetings and subcommittee meetings are streamed, all of our voting sessions are streamed, and you can participate in hearings, at least on the House side, from the comfort of your own home. It used to be you had to drive to Annapolis, which was never that far, but I know was inconvenient because it involved a trip on the Beltway, and sit in a room for hours, knee to knee with other people, not knowing when the bill was going to be called. Well, now you can wait in the comfort of your own home. So please be involved with us and engaged, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again.
And I will back clean up again and ditto everything that my colleagues said. And I do want to reiterate a point that they both just made, which is we love hearing from you. We really do. We represent you. We are your voices in Annapolis. So reach out to us. You have our contact information. We'll put it up in the chat again. Testify on bills, send in written testimony, or just email us, just reach out to us. We love hearing from you all. So thanks again, this was fun.
So I'd like to close by thanking Senator Lee and Delegate Corman and Delegate Love for spending the time with us this evening. Answering all the questions I put forth on behalf of the participants who sent in the questions. I want to thank Samir Paul for culling the questions and sending them to me so I could ask them in groupings. A great job. A lot of great questions came through as a result. And thank everybody for attending and for your active participation, which is always the case with District 16 constituents. So thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Wow.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. We really
Night,
do.
everyone. Great meeting.
We really do.
Bye.
We really do.
Bye-bye.
This is
Somebody's
great.
gotta hit close.
Night, thank you.
Stay safe and well, everybody.
Thank you all for the info.
Yeah,
Thanks to all.
she hit it. Yeah, go.
Good night, everyone.